dust choked him. Gunfire echoed a final deafening crack that seemed to split the very air in the Sonora Mercantile Bank. Jedediah fell. He didn't crumple or cry out. One moment he was a mountain of a man, a bulwark of certainty in Sterling's chaotic life. The next, he was just dead weight, hitting the floorboards with a heavy final thud. Sterling's world tilted, the shouts of the tellers and the screams from the street, fading into a dull roar in his ears. He saw the smoking barrel of the pistol not in his own hand, but in Silas's. Silas, with his silver-tongued charm and eyes that held the cold glitter of a coiled rattler, stood over Jedediah's body. A faint, almost serene smile played on his lips. "A shame," he said, his voice a silken thread in the tapestry of violence. Jedediah always said loyalty was the only currency that mattered. Looks like his account was overdrawn. Sterling's own gun was still hot in his hand from covering their escape, but he hadn't fired it inside the bank. He hadn't needed to. This was supposed to be simple, in and out. No one gets hurt. Jedediah's cardinal rule. "Silas, what did you do?" Sterling's voice was a ragged whisper lost in the ringing aftermath of the gunshot. Silas turned his gaze to Sterling, and the smile widened. It was a terrible knowing thing. "I did what needed to be done, Sterling. I corrected a historical error." He moved with a liquid grace, scooping the last of the gold bars into a canvas sack. The town posse was gathering outside, their shouts growing louder, more organized. They were out of time. "He was like a father to us," Sterling choked out, stumbling toward Jedediah, his mind refusing to process the sight of the old man's vacant eyes staring at the ceiling. "He was Silas," agreed his voice, dropping to an intimate, conspiratorial whisper as he closed the distance between them. He clapped a hand on Sterling's shoulder, a gesture that felt less like camaraderie and more like possession, which makes this all the more poetic. With a sudden vicious shove, Silas sent Sterling sprawling backward over a toppled writing desk. A fresh wave of gunfire erupted from the street, shattering the bank's front window. He shot Jedediah. Silas roared his voice, projecting pure, believable anguish. Sterling killed him. He tried to take all the gold for himself. The betrayal was so swift, so absolute, it left Sterling breathless. Silas tossed one of the lighter gold sacks at Sterling's feet. "There's your share, you backstabbing snake," he screamed for the benefit of the lawmen now storming the entrance. Then, leaning in close so only Sterling could hear his breath ghosting over Sterling's ear, he whispered the words that would become the anthem of Sterling's nightmares. "The apples don't fall far from the tree, do they, son?" Before Sterling could react, Silas was gone, vanishing through the back of the bank like a phantom. The posse burst in, rifles leveled. All they saw was Sterling Rhodes, gun in hand, standing over the body of his mentor with a bag of gold at his feet. A shot rang out, and a searing pain exploded in Sterling's shoulder, spinning him around and slamming him against the wall. Panic, raw and primal, cut through his shock. He fired a single, unaimed shot toward the ceiling, the blast providing just enough chaos for him to hurl himself through the now shattered side window. He hit the dusty alleyway in a shower of glass and splintered wood, the pain in his shoulder a white-hot poker. He scrambled to his feet, his vision swimming. He had to run. Silas had not just killed Jedediah. He had murdered Sterling's past and incinerated his future in a single, treacherous act. As he staggered toward where their horses were tied, his hand brushed against the breast pocket of his coat. He felt the hard, familiar outline of the one thing Jedediah never went anywhere without. In the confusion, Jedediah's silver locket must have been torn from his neck. Sterling's fingers closed around it, a cold piece of a cold memory. He didn't have time to look. He just ran the cries of murderer, chasing him out of Sonora and into the waiting, unforgiving arms of the desert. 3 weeks felt like a lifetime. The bullet wound had festered, poisoning his blood and blurring the line between the burning sand and the fever dreams that plagued his sleep. His horse, a stubborn mare named Copper, was the only reason he was still alive, her steady gait carrying his near-lifeless body across sun-scorched alkali flats, where the heat shimmered like water. The bounty hunters were 2 days behind him, maybe less. He could feel their presence like a pressure in the air, a promise of a rope and a short drop. He was Sterling Rhodes, and the man who shot his partner in the back for gold. The lie had grown legs and outrun the truth by 100 miles. He was delirious when the canyon appeared, a jagged wound in the earth's crust. The deep red walls, streaked with veins of iron ore that glowed like arteries in the dying light, promised shade and maybe water. The stories about this place, a haunted labyrinth ruled by a spectral Apache Queen who slaughtered any white man foolish enough to enter, were faint whispers compared to the screaming agony in his shoulder. Dying men don't have the luxury of superstition. Copper picked her way down a narrow trail worn smooth by centuries of wind. The descent was a spiral into the planet's heart, the sky shrinking to a sliver of brilliant blue above. Sterling's head lolled forward, his consciousness slipping away like sand through his fingers. In his fevered mind, he saw Jedediah's face, not as he was in the bank, but as he was on countless nights by a campfire, a craggy smile on his face. Trust is a fragile thing, Sterling, the memory whispered. Once it's broken, you can never piece it back together the same way. Then darkness took him completely. He never saw her approach. When awareness returned, it came in pieces. The scent of sage and something clean and medicinal that cut through the fog in his brain. The feel of soft furs beneath him. The muted light of a fire filtering through a hide wall. His shoulder, which had been a source of relentless fire, was now a dull, manageable ache. It had been cleaned and expertly bandaged with strips of soft cloth that smelled faintly of desert primrose. A shadow moved near the entrance of the shelter, and Sterling's hand instinctively shot to his hip. His holster was empty. "You were dying," a voice said. The English was flawless, measured, carrying an authority that resonated in the quiet space. Men who are dying have no need for weapons. She stepped into the light, and Sterling understood why men spoke of her in whispers. It wasn't fear she inspired, but awe. She was tall and lean, with hair as black as a starless midnight, braided with silver beads that caught the firelight. Her dress was of the softest white deerskin, adorned with intricate beadwork that shimmered with every small movement. But it was her eyes that held him captive. They were dark, yes, but not cold. They were intelligent, ancient, and they studied him with the quiet intensity of someone reading a map to a land they already knew by heart. "You're her," Sterling managed his voice, a raw rasp. The legend, the Apache Queen." A slight, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It did not mock him. "My name is Ayanna," she said. "And you, Cowboy, have a choice to make." Sterling tried to push himself up, wincing, as a sharp pain reminded him of his injury. What kind of choice? She knelt beside him, her movements fluid and deliberate. She was close enough now that he could see the fine lines of wisdom around her eyes, smell the clean scent of sage that clung to her. "The choice every man faces when he enters my domain," she explained, her voice calm and even. "You can trust me and live, or you can die trying to leave." Her fingertips brushed the bandage on his shoulder, a touch so light it was barely there. Yet it sent a jolt through his system that had nothing to do with pain. It was something else, something vital and deeply human that he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Why, Sterling asked the question tearing from his raw throat. "Why help me?" The stories all say you kill men like me." Ayana's faint smile vanished, replaced by a look of profound gravity. "Because, Sterling Rhodes," she said, and the sound of his name on her lips was a shock. "You are not like the others who have come here." She knew his name. Somehow, impossibly, in this hidden sanctuary, cut off from the world, she knew exactly who he was. And for the first time since the bank floor in Sonora, Sterling felt a flicker not of fear, but of hope. Sterling woke to voices just beyond the hide walls of the shelter. Dawn's first light painted the interior in soft amber tones. The fever had broken during the night, leaving him weak but clear-headed. Ayana's voice was unmistakable, speaking in a rapid melodic tongue that he now recognized as Apache. Her tone was sharp, authoritative. The voice that answered was male, younger, and vibrating with a barely controlled anger. When Ayana entered the shelter moments later, a palpable tension radiated from her. "My nephew Kota questions my judgment," she said, without preamble, her dark eyes finding his. She knelt to check his bandages, her movements brisk and efficient. "He believes you are a trap, that the white world will follow you here and bring death to our people." Sterling watched her skilled fingers work at the cloth strips. Her hands were strong, capable. Maybe he's right. Perhaps Ayana conceded, her gaze meeting his. The intensity there was startling. "But I do not believe so." "Why?" Sterling pressed, needing to understand the gamble she was taking. "What makes you so sure I'm different?" Instead of answering directly, she began to rewrap his shoulder with fresh bandages infused with a cooling herbal paste. Her proximity was unnerving. He could feel the warmth of her breath on his neck, smell the wild, clean scent of her hair. An intimacy both clinical and deeply personal settled between them. When was the last time someone had cared for him this way? The question was a lonely echo in a life defined by harsh self-reliance. "You could have taken horses from our herd," she said quietly, her focus on her task. "You could have stolen supplies and tried to flee deeper into the mountains. You were desperate, but not dishonorable. Instead, you awaken and ask questions about my judgment." Sterling found himself studying the graceful curve of her neck, the way a single errant strand of black hair rested against her skin. "Maybe I'm just too weak to run." "You are stronger than you pretend to be." She countered, her fingers brushing his skin as she secured the bandage. The touch was brief, professional, yet it sent a current down his spine. Men like you, men who have survived what you have, do not do so by accident. The moment stretched, charged with an unspoken understanding. Then Ayana pulled back, and the spell was broken. "Kota wishes to move the camp," she continued, her voice all business once more as she gathered the old bandages. "He believes your presence puts everyone at risk." "He's probably right about that, too." "Probably," she agreed, rising to her feet and smoothing the front of her deerskin dress. "But this is my decision to make, not his." Just then, a new sound cut through the morning's tranquility. It wasn't the careful, near-silent tread of Apache ponies, but the heavy, rhythmic thunder of shod mounts being ridden hard and fast. Ayana's face went rigid, her entire body tensing like a drawn bowstring. "They found you," she whispered, her voice tight. Sterling was already struggling to his feet, ignoring the fire in his shoulder. "How many?" Ayana moved to the entrance, peering through a small gap in the hide. "4 men," she reported, her voice low and urgent. "Well armed. They are following your tracks from the canyon mouth." "I have to go." Sterling looked around frantically for his clothes, his gun. His presence here was a death sentence for these people. "If they find me, they'll kill everyone to get to me." Ayana turned back to him, her expression fierce, resolute. "Which is precisely why you are not going anywhere." Sterling stared at her, bewildered. "What are you talking about?" She moved close, her dark eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to draw all the air from the small shelter. "You wish to know why I saved you? Why I am willing to risk my people for a white man I barely know." The sound of the approaching horses was louder now, the jingle of harnesses and the gruff voices of men echoing off the canyon walls. They would be in the camp in minutes. "Because Ayanna," said her voice dropping to a near whisper, "I believe you might be worth the risk." The hoofbeats stopped just outside the main camp clearing. Ayanna pressed a finger to Sterling's lips, her touch sending a jolt through him. Not a word she breathed. She moved with fluid grace to a wooden chest in the corner, her hands emerging with a bundle of women's clothing, a long buckskin skirt, a simple blouse, and a woven shawl. "You can't be serious," Sterling whispered, his mind reeling. "Unless you have a better idea," she countered, thrusting the clothes at him. "Quickly, keep your head down and keep your mouth shut." He could hear the voices now, rough and demanding. "We're looking for a man," one of them called out. "Goes by Sterling Rhodes, wounded, riding a copper-colored mare." As Sterling, clumsy and desperate, struggled into the unfamiliar garments, Ayanna stepped outside the shelter. Her voice carried clearly into the morning air. But it was changed. The perfect, measured English was gone, replaced by a halting, broken speech, the careful performance of someone who barely understood the language. No white man here. Only women. Children. "Don't give us that axe, squaw." The venom in the bounty hunter's voice made Sterling's blood run cold. He took a step toward the entrance, but a sharp warning look from Ayanna froze him in place. "You search if you want," Ayanna said, her accent thick and deliberate, "but you find nothing." Sterling heard the heavy tread of boots on hard-packed earth, the creak of leather, the metallic click of a rifle's hammer being cocked. Through a tiny slit in the hide wall, he caught glimpses of movement, 4 hard-faced men, spreading out their eyes, scanning the camp with predatory arrogance. They poked into shelters, overturned baskets of dried corn, their presence a violation of the morning's peace. "Well, well," a new voice drawled much closer now. "What have we here?" One of the men was approaching their shelter. Sterling's heart hammered against his ribs. He pulled the shawl over his head, hunching his broad shoulders to disguise his height and build, and retreated into the deepest shadows of the tent. The hide flap was thrust aside. A weather-beaten man with a graying beard and eyes as cold and empty as a winter sky peered inside. His gaze swept the interior landing on Sterling's huddled form. It paused for a moment that stretched into an eternity. Sterling held his breath, expecting the shout of discovery, the blast of a gun. "Just an old woman," the man muttered, a note of disgust in his voice. He stepped back outside. Sterling remained frozen, every muscle screaming with tension, until the voices faded and the sound of hoofbeats resumed, growing more distant as the bounty hunters rode deeper into the canyon. Only then did he dare to exhale, the breath escaping him in a long, shuddering sigh. Ayanna returned her composed mask, slipping for just a second to reveal the raw, shaken woman beneath. "They will be back," she said quietly, her voice returning to its natural fluent cadence. This was merely their first search. Sterling began pulling off the borrowed clothes, his hands trembling slightly with the lingering adrenaline. "I should have let them take me. It would have saved you this trouble. And allowed them to kill you." Ayanna helped him out of the cumbersome skirt, her fingers brushing his as she took the fabric. "That would solve nothing. It would keep your people safe. My people chose their path when they chose me to lead them," she stated, folding the clothes with deliberate, calming care. "And I chose my path when I decided to save you." The weight of her words settled in the space between them. Sterling found himself truly seeing her, looking past the formidable leader to the woman who carried the burden of her people's lives, a woman who had just hidden her fear behind a clever, dangerous performance. and she had done it for him. Why? The question came out rougher than he intended, a demand born of a lifetime of suspicion. Why are you doing this? Ayanna set the clothes aside and moved closer. The small shelter seemed to shrink around them. She stood near enough that he could see the tiny flecks of gold in her dark eyes, near enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Because she said softly, her voice a low thrum that vibrated through him, "When I look at you, Sterling, I do not see a white man or a killer or an outlaw." Her hand rose, and her fingers, surprisingly gentle, touched his cheek. The contact was like a spark on dry tinder. "I see a man who understands what it means to lose everything and to keep fighting anyway." The space between them seemed to collapse. Sterling found himself leaning into her touch, drawn by a force stronger than logic or caution, a profound recognition of a strength in her that mirrored the one he'd always sought in himself. "They will come back tonight," Ayanna whispered, her eyes holding his. "When they do, you will need to stay close to me. Close enough that anyone watching will believe we are—" She trailed off, a faint blush rising on her high cheekbones. "Believe" were what Sterling's voice was husky. Ayanna's gaze did not waver, and in their depths Sterling saw his own desperate hunger for connection reflected back at him. "Believe we are exactly what we are pretending not to be." Night fell like a black velvet curtain across the canyon, bringing a tension so thick it felt electric on the skin. Sterling sat by Ayanna's fire, his restored gun belt heavy on his hips, a comforting and familiar weight. Every rustle of leaves, every distant cry of a coyote sounded like the approach of men. "They will come from the North Ridge." Ayanna said, her voice a quiet counterpoint to the crackling flames. She didn't look up from the intricate beadwork in her lap, her needle flashing in the firelight. "It is the only approach that offers them cover from above." "You've done this before," Sterling observed. It wasn't a question. "White men come looking for something." She stated, her hands moving with a practiced, hypnotic precision. "Gold, land, people to blame for their troubles. They always believe they are the first to find us." What happened to the others? "The ones who came looking for a fight found one." Her voice remained steady, but Sterling heard the steel beneath the surface. "The ones who came looking for shelter. That depended on why they needed it." "And which one am I?" She finally looked up, and the dancing flames were captured in her dark eyes. "I am still deciding." A faint sound drifted across the canyon, the scrape of a boot against stone. It was distant but unmistakable. Ayanna's hands stilled. "They're coming," Sterling said, his own hand resting on the grip of his Colt. "Yes." She set aside her beadwork and moved closer to him on the blanket, so close that her knee brushed against his leg. "Remember what I told you. Stay close. Say nothing." Sterling nodded, his senses overwhelmed by her proximity. The scent of sage and wood smoke and something else that was uniquely her filled his head. "Ayanna, if this goes wrong—" "It will not," she interrupted, her hand finding his, her fingers intertwining with his, with a surprising strength. "Trust me." The sound of footsteps grew louder, more distinct. Multiple men trying and failing to move with stealth through the unfamiliar terrain. Sterling counted at least 6. The original 4 had brought reinforcements from their camp downstream. Ayanna squeezed his hand, once then released it. With a fluid grace, she banked the fire, reducing the blaze to a bed of glowing embers that cast their faces in deep, dramatic shadows. Then she returned to his side, settling against him with an intimacy that felt both terrifyingly real and utterly natural. "Put your arm around me," she whispered, her breath warm against his ear. Sterling hesitated for a single charged heartbeat before his arm, His good arm slipped around her waist. She fit against him perfectly, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder, as if it were made for her. To any observer peering from the darkness, they were lovers lost in their own world. When they arrive, Ayanna murmured her lips, brushing the sensitive skin of his neck. Let me do the talking. No matter what they say about you, about me, about my people, you will remain silent. Do you understand? Her breath sent a shiver down his spine. What if they recognize me? They will not. Not like this. Her hand came to rest on his chest directly over his heart. You are not the same man who rode into my canyon. Before Sterling could ask what she meant, harsh whispers and the click of weapons being readied announced the bounty hunter's arrival. They had surrounded the small clearing. Showtime, Ayanna breathed, and he felt her body tense against his. The first shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness at the edge of the firelight. Then another and another. Soon they were encircled by armed men, their faces obscured, their rifles glinting in the dying light of the embers. "Evenin', folks," came the familiar, gravelly voice of the gray-bearded leader. "Hope we ain't interrupting anything important." Ayanna lifted her head slowly from Sterling's shoulder, blinking as if being roused from a pleasant dream. When she spoke, her English was once again heavily accented, each word chosen with a convincing hesitation. "You wake us. Is late. For visitors." The bounty hunter stepped closer, his rifle held in a casual but ready posture. "Sorry about that, ma'am. Still looking for that wounded man. Thought maybe he circled back." Sterling kept his breathing even. His face turned slightly away from the light, his features lost in the shadows cast by Ayanna's body. Her hand remained on his chest, her fingers spread over his heart as if staking a claim. "No white man here," she said, her voice taking on a fiercely protective edge. "Only my... how you say." She glanced up at Sterling, her eyes filled with a look of such genuine affection it stole his breath, then turned back to the bounty hunter. "My man." One of the other hunters let out a crude snort. "Your man. Since when do Apache Queens take on white trash lovers?" The insult hung in the air like foul smoke. Sterling felt Ayanna go rigid, a wave of cold fury radiating from her, but her voice when she spoke remained perfectly controlled. "Since I choose what is good. For my heart." "Well, ain't that something?" the leader mused, beginning a slow circle around their small fire, his eyes scrutinizing them. "Mind if we get a better look at this Romeo of yours?" Ayanna's grip tightened on Sterling's shirt. "He is shy. Not speak your language good." "That's so." The man crouched down, bringing his weathered face uncomfortably level with theirs. "Well, shy or not, I'd like to see those pretty eyes of his." The moment balanced on a razor's edge. One flicker of recognition, and this quiet clearing would become a slaughterhouse. Innocent people, children sleeping in nearby shelters, would pay the price for the sins of his past. Slowly, deliberately, Sterling raised his head. The embers cast a flickering upward light, but Ayanna had positioned them expertly. The shadows played across his face, obscuring the sharp lines of his jaw, the scar that marked his cheek. More than the shadows, though, it was the tableau they created that sold the lie. The way she held him, the fierce possessiveness in her eyes, the utter intimacy of their posture. It created a narrative that contradicted everything the bounty hunters had come expecting to find. Satisfied, Ayanna asked, her tone sharp with an indignation that was utterly convincing. The gray-bearded man studied Sterling for a long, silent moment. Sterling met his gaze without flinching, letting his own eyes reflect the quiet contentment of a man holding the center of his world. With Ayanna pressed against him, her scent filling his lungs, it wasn't difficult to pretend. The line between performance and reality had begun to blur. Finally, the bounty hunter straightened up with a sigh of frustrated resignation. He's darker than I expected, sun-weathered. Almost looks like he belongs here. He does belong here, Ayanna said simply. With me. Another hunter spat into the dirt, disgustin'. White man layin' with a savage. The word hit Sterling like a physical blow. His muscles coiled, his hand instinctively tightening on his Colt. A low growl rumbled in his chest, but Ayanna's fingers pressed firmly against his heart, a silent, urgent command to stand down. Be careful what you call me in my own home. Ayanna said, her accent vanishing, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that carried more menace than a shout. My people have arrows trained on your hearts from 3 different positions. Continue to show disrespect and your bones will bleach alongside the others in the sun. The threat was not empty. Sterling could feel it now, the presence of unseen eyes watching from the darkness, the silent tension of drawn bowstrings. The bounty hunters felt it too. The air crackled with deadly potential. The leader raised a placating hand to his men. No need for threats, ma'am. Just doing our job. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of mock courtesy. Sorry to have disturbed your evening. As the men melted back into the shadows, Sterling remained frozen, every nerve alight. He waited until the last sound of their retreating footsteps faded into the vast silence of the canyon. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. They're gone, Ayanna whispered against his shoulder. She did not move away. For now. Sterling looked down at her, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the embers. He saw something new in her expression, a vulnerability she had kept carefully hidden. That was dangerous. You could have just handed me over. Yes, she said quietly. I could have. Why didn't you? Her hand slid from his chest up to his neck, her thumb gently tracing the line of his jaw. Because I meant what I said, she murmured, her eyes searching his. You belong here now. The words spoken in the charged quiet of the night were more than a statement. They were an invitation, a promise. Sterling found himself leaning closer, drawn into the orbit of her strength, her courage. Ayanna. He began, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. She pressed her fingers to his lips, silencing him. Come, she said, rising with a grace that seemed impossible. We cannot stay by the fire. It is too exposed. She extended her hand to him. He looked at her hand, then at her face. He knew that taking it was a point of no return. It was crossing a line from which there was no retreat. It was accepting a future he had never dared to imagine. He took her hand. Ayanna led him through the sleeping camp to a shelter set apart from the others. It was larger, the hides more finely stitched, the interior, a space of quiet order and personal history. Rich furs covered the ground, and intricate weavings depicting the stories of her people adorned the walls. The air inside smelled of sage leather and something indefinably feminine. It was her private domain, a place he sensed very few were ever invited to enter. They will watch us now, she said, lighting a small oil lamp that cast the space in a warm, golden light. She settled onto the furs, her posture betraying a sudden weariness. They will not give up so easily. They will post men on the ridges and wait for you to make a mistake. Sterling remained standing near the entrance, a wave of guilt washing over him. He was the mistake. His presence was the danger. Maybe I should leave. Draw them off. No. The word was sharp, cracking with a fear she could no longer conceal. She looked up at him, her composure fractured. Please. Stay. The raw plea in her voice undid him. He knelt beside her so close he could see the way the lamplight danced in the silver threads of her hair. "I'm not going anywhere. Promise me." She whispered her hand, finding his, her fingers lacing through his with a desperate strength. "Promise me you will not try to leave in the night to protect us. I have lost too many people to the noble gestures of foolish men." The pain in her voice was a blade to his heart. "I promise," he said, and he meant it. Ayanna studied his face, her gaze tracing his features as if memorizing them. "When I was a child," she began, her voice soft and distant, "my grandmother told me stories of men who could cross between worlds, warriors who belonged to nowhere and everywhere at once. She said you could know them by the storm in their eyes. I'm not a spirit, Ayanna. I'm just a man who's made too many mistakes. He carried the weight of Jedediah's death, the sting of Silas's betrayal, the brand of murderer." "Are you?" she countered. Her free hand came up to trace the faint scar along his jawline. "Because the man who rode into my canyon was running from death. The man sitting with me now. He is running toward something else." Sterling caught her hand, turning his head to press her palm flat against his cheek. The contact was electric grounding. "What am I running toward?" "Me," she answered. The word was barely a whisper, but it landed with the force of a thunderclap, shaking the foundations of his broken world. The small space between them vanished. His good arm came up to cradle her face, his thumb brushing across her high cheekbone. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a moment. "I know what this means," she said, her voice heavy with the weight of reality. "A white man and an Apache woman. The world we live in, it will not accept it. It will not accept us. Then we'll make our own world." He heard himself say the words coming from a place of deep, instinctual certainty he didn't know he possessed. The kiss was inevitable, a collision of two lonely, embattled souls. It was gentle at first, a question asked and answered, then deepened as years of pain and solitude found their solace in each other. When they finally broke apart breathless, the small lamp seemed to burn brighter. The stories were right about one thing, Ayanna whispered against his lips, a small wry smile playing on her mouth. "No white man who enters my domain leaves unchanged." His forehead rested against hers. "What about you? Are you unchanged?" The smile grew. "I stopped being unchanged the moment I decided to save you." Suddenly, from the darkness outside, a night bird called across the canyon. A moment later, it was answered from the ridges above, not by another bird, but by a sharp human whistle. The bounty hunters were positioning themselves for a long siege. "They'll try to starve us out." Sterling said, his old instincts flaring. "Cut off the water, the escape routes." "Let them try." The steel returned to Ayanna's voice, the formidable leader re-emerging. "This canyon has been my people's refuge for generations. We know every cave, every hidden spring, every secret path through these rocks." Sterling pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "You're not just talking about outlasting them, are you?" Ayanna's smile turned predatory, a flash of white in the warm light. "Tomorrow, those men will learn why the legends call me Queen." She reached over and blew out the lamp, plunging them into an intimate darkness. "And we will see if you truly meant what you said about making our own world." Dawn broke not with birdsong, but with the sounds of panicked horses and the furious shouts of men. Sterling awoke with Ayanna's head on his shoulder, her dark hair spilled across his chest. For a disoriented moment, the chaos outside was a distant storm, unimportant compared to the warmth and solid reality of her beside him. Then the shouts coalesced into curses, and he was fully awake. The bounty hunters were in trouble. "What's happening?" Sterling asked, already reaching for his gun belt, which she had quietly returned to his side during the night. "Justice," she said simply. She rose and began to dress with a fluid efficiency, her movements economical and precise. Kota and his warriors spent the night cutting their horses loose and destroying their supplies. What little water they carried now tastes of dirt and ash. Through the hide walls, Sterling could hear the men's frustrated cries as they discovered their mounts scattered, their saddlebags torn open, their canteens fouled. "You planned this," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I plan to give them a choice." Ayana corrected, braiding her hair with swift, practiced motions. "Leave now on foot with what little dignity they have left, or stay and face the consequences of threatening my people." "And if they choose to fight?" Sterling asked, as he strapped on his gun belt, the familiar weight settling on his hips. He felt more whole, more himself than he had in years. Ayana's smile was as sharp as a flint blade. "Then they will discover why legends grow around certain names." The tent flap opened, and Kota stood there. His young face was flush with victory, but his eyes, when they fell on Sterling, were still filled with a hostile suspicion. He spoke rapidly to Ayana in Apache, his tone urgent and demanding. "What did he say?" Sterling asked when Kota had finished. "The bounty hunters are preparing to leave." Ayana translated, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "But their leader wishes to speak with me first." They emerged from the tent together. As they walked into the main clearing, Sterling felt the curious and disapproving stares of Ayana's people. But no one seemed surprised to see him emerge from their leader's private shelter. The unspoken had become fact. The gray-bearded bounty hunter stood beside his single remaining horse, his face a grim mask of defeat and humiliation. His men were gathered behind him, a sorry-looking lot, dusty and disarmed. "Clever woman," the leader called out as Ayana and Sterling approached, his voice dripping with resentment. "Clever enough to protect what is mine," Ayana replied, her voice ringing with authority. The man's eyes shifted to Sterling, a nasty sneer twisting his lips. "Still claim this is the man you love? Sterling Rhodes, the back shooter?" "I know him very well," Ayana stated calmly. She moved to Sterling's side, her hand finding his and lacing her fingers through his in a gesture of unwavering solidarity. "I know he is the man who will share my tent, my life, and my people's future." At her words, Sterling felt the last chains binding him to his past snap. The name Sterling Rhodes was a ghost, a fiction created by Silas. "She's right," he said, his own voice carrying across the quiet canyon, clear and strong. "The man you're looking for died in this desert 3 weeks ago. What came out of it was something else." "And what's that?" the bounty hunter demanded with a sneer. Sterling looked at Ayana, at the fierce pride in her eyes, and he knew the answer. A man who found his home. The bounty hunter spat in the dirt. "This ain't over. There'll be others. A bigger posse. The law. Let them come." Ayana's voice was the wind through the stone arches. "But when you get back to whatever miserable town you call home, tell them the truth. Tell them what really happens to men who come looking for trouble in my canyon." "And what's that?" the man growled. Ayana smiled, a slow, radiant expression that seemed to light up the morning. Her hand tightened on Sterling's. "The smart ones never want to leave." As the bounty hunters began their long, ignominious walk out of the canyon, a strange quiet fell over the camp. In that quiet, Sterling felt the first stirrings of peace. But it was a fragile peace, built on a foundation of unanswered questions. He looked down at the locket. He still carried its silver surface cool against his palm. The woman inside was still a mystery, and the cryptic phrase Silas had whispered, "The apples don't fall far from the tree," still echoed in his mind, a riddle he had to solve. Days turned into weeks. Sterling healed not just his body but his spirit. Under Ayana's guidance, he learned the rhythms of the canyon, the secret language of the wind and the stone. He also learned about the woman in the locket. Ayana, whose network of information reached far beyond the canyon walls, through trusted traders, sent a description of the locket and the woman to a contact in Prescott. The reply came a month later, carried by a stoic Navajo trader. The news shattered Sterling's fragile peace. The woman in the photograph was Elspeth MacLeod, a Scottish immigrant who had died 20 years prior. She was Silas's mother, and her husband Silas's father was a man named Angus MacLeod, a gold prospector who had been partners with none other than Jedediah. They had a claim together, a rich one. But Angus had died in a mysterious mine collapse, and Jedediah, the sole survivor, had walked away with all the gold, the same gold that had been the foundation of their gang's fortune. The world tilted again. Jedediah, his savior. His father figure was a thief and likely a murderer. Sterling's fragmented nightmares of a fire of two men shouting in a dark tunnel suddenly coalesced into a horrifying, coherent memory he had suppressed since childhood. He had been there. He had seen it. He had. He sat with Ayana by the fire, the truth a bitter poison in his mouth. My whole life, he said, his voice hollow, is built on a lie, on a dead man's gold. He looked at her, his eyes pleading for an absolution he didn't deserve. Jedediah took me in, but he built my life with stolen bricks. Ayana listened, her expression unreadable. When he was finished, she simply took his hand. A man is not the sum of his father's sins, she said, her voice a balm on his raw soul. He is the sum of his own choices. You have chosen to stay, to protect. That is who you are, Sterling, not who Jedediah was. Her words were a lifeline, but Sterling knew this was not over. Silas was not a man to be satisfied with simple framing. His revenge was a deeper, more twisted thing. He wouldn't be sending bounty hunters. He would come himself. And he would aim to burn down the entire world Sterling was trying to build. He came with the storm. A howling wind swept down the canyon, first carrying sand that scoured the rock and clawed at the sky, turning the midday sun into a bruised orange smudge. And with the wind came the sound, a low, mechanical chattering that Sterling recognized with a dread that turned his blood to ice. A Gatling gun. Silas had returned, not with a small posse, but with a small army of mercenaries and a weapon of mass destruction mounted on the back of a wagon. They were positioned at the canyon's mouth, blocking the only wide escape route. He means to kill us all. Kota said, his youthful anger now forged into the cold fury of a warrior. To wipe us from this earth, to get to you. He won't get the chance, Sterling said, his mind racing, piecing together a desperate strategy. He was no longer just an outlaw. He was a defender. This was his home. These were his people. The battle for the canyon was brutal and swift. Sterling using his knowledge of military tactics and Kota using his people's intimate knowledge of the terrain became a formidable team. They orchestrated rock slides, set ambushes in narrow passages, and used the raging sandstorm as a cloak, their arrows finding their marks in the blinding chaos. But Silas's men were relentless, and the Gatling gun was a monster chewing through the sandstone cliffs where warriors took cover. The climax came at the heart of the storm on a treacherous high cliff edge known as the spine of the world. Silas, seeing his frontal assault failing, had taken a small group and scaled the cliffs, capturing Kota in a desperate flanking maneuver. He now held the young warrior with a knife to his throat, Sterling and Ayana cornered on the narrow ledge. Here we are, Sterling. Silas screamed over the wind, his charming smile a grotesque mask of madness. Full circle. The sand whipped around them, a furious, blinding vortex. "Let him go, Silas," Sterling yelled back. His pistol aimed, though the shot was impossible in the gale. "This is between you and me." "Oh, it's always been between you and me." Silas laughed a wild, unhinged sound. "Did you think the bank was about gold? It was never about the gold. It was about this. It was about making you feel what I felt as a boy, watching my father's partner, his best friend, leave him to die in the dark and take everything. He shoved the locket, which he must have retrieved in Sonora, into Sterling's view. He even took his wife's picture. And then the final devastating piece of the puzzle fell into place. Silas's eyes burning with a righteous 20-year-old fury locked onto Sterling's. Jedediah didn't just take the gold. He took you, my father's son. His last words to Jedediah were a warning. "The apples don't fall far from the tree, Jedediah. You'll see." He knew you had the same treacherous blood in you. Sterling stared, the wind tearing the breath from his lungs. My father's son. He wasn't just a boy Jedediah had found. He was Angus MacLeod's son, Silas's brother. The revelation was a physical blow. In that moment of stunned horror, Ayanna moved. Not with a weapon, but with a wisdom that was far deadlier. She spoke, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the storm in the Apache tongue. She wasn't speaking to Silas or Sterling, but to Coda. Silas, distracted by his own monologue, didn't understand. But Coda did. Following her quiet instructions, he drove his own body backward using Silas's grip as leverage and slammed them both against the rock wall. The knife clattered away. Sterling fired his bullet, tearing through the fleshy part of Silas's arm, forcing him to release Coda. Silas screamed in rage and pain, clutching his arm, his face a mask of pure hatred. He lunged for Sterling, a man with nothing left to lose. They grappled on the edge of the abyss, two brothers locked in a death struggle born from a generation of lies. But Silas was wounded, his movements wild. Sterling was fighting for a future, for a home. He twisted, using Silas's momentum against him, and sent him stumbling over the precipice. For a heart-stopping second, Sterling's hand shot out and caught his brother's wrist. Their eyes met over the churning, sandy void. All the hatred, the pain, and the betrayal were laid bare. Sterling saw not a monster, but a broken boy who had lost everything. "It doesn't have to end this way," Sterling grunted, his muscles straining. Silas looked at his brother's face, then at Ayanna's, standing behind him. He saw the world Sterling had built from the ashes of their family's ruin. And in his eyes, something shifted. Not forgiveness, but acceptance. He shook his head slowly. "Yes," he whispered, the sound almost lost to the wind. "It does." He let go. The storm passed as quickly as it had come. The silence it left behind was profound, broken only by the weeping of the wind through the canyons. They buried their dead Apache and mercenary alike. Silas's body was never found, swallowed by the shifting sands. In the days that followed, a new quiet settled over the community, one of healing and change. Coda came to Sterling as he was cleaning his rifle. The young warrior no longer looked at him with hostility, but with a hard-won respect. He said nothing, simply placed a hand over his own heart and bowed his head slightly. It was enough. That evening, Sterling sat with Ayanna on the ledge overlooking the canyon. He told her everything, the final ugly truth of his parentage, of his brotherhood, with the man who had tried to destroy them all. He confessed that his entire life had been shaped by a crime he never knew had happened. Ayanna listened, her hand resting on his knee, a silent anchor in his turbulent sea of memory. When he finished, his voice raw with emotion, she said, "The blood of your father does not define you, Sterling MacLeod. The love in your heart does." You are not his son. You are not Jedediah's heir. You are a man of this canyon. You are our man. A week later, Sterling walked to a secluded spot near a hidden spring where new life was already pushing through the damp earth. He took out the silver locket. He looked at the faded image of Elspeth MacLeod, his mother a woman caught between two betrayals, her face a portrait of a forgotten tragedy. With his bare hands, he dug a deep hole in the rich soil. He placed the locket inside a final burial for the ghosts of Angus and Silas, of Jedediah and Sterling Rhodes. Over it, he planted a small cottonwood sapling he had carried from the spring. It was a letting go of a poisoned past and the planting of new roots. He returned to the ledge where Ayanna was waiting. The setting sun painted the canyon walls in hues of gold and crimson. They stood together, side by side, their shoulders touching. They didn't speak of the future or of legends or of the storms that might still come. Their shared silence was a testament to the world they had built, a promise stronger than any words. The cowboy and the queen finally home.